The pain was a white-hot poker twisting in my gut. It stole my breath, made my vision swim in gray static, and buckled my knees. I collapsed onto the cold tile of the kitchen floor, my phone skittering away from my grasp. Each twitch of my muscles was a fresh wave of agony. It felt like my insides were being shredded by glass. I managed to drag the phone back, my fingers slick with sweat, and hit the number for my mother. It was my only instinct, the one programmed into me since birth. When you're hurt, you call mom. The phone rang twice before she picked up, her voice a clipped, irritated sigh. Clara, what is it? We're about to leave. Mom, I gasped, the word tearing from my throat. Something's wrong, the pain. It's really bad, I can't stand up. There was a pause, and in the background, I could hear the rustle of a garment bag and my sister Amelia's trilling laughter. Of course, the recital. The mid-season showcase that had been the singular focus of our household for the past 4 months. Everything revolved around Amelia's ballet career. My life was just the background noise to her grand performance. You probably just have cramps, my mother said dismissively. Take some ibuprofen and lie down. Honestly, Clara, your timing is impeccable. You know how important tonight is for your sister. It's not cramps, I sobbed, curling into a tighter ball against the kitchen cabinets. The world was tilting, the edges of my vision going dark. Mom, please. I think I need to go to the hospital. I think my appendix burst. The sound of my father's voice came through, muffled but clear. Is she trying to get attention again? Tell her to knock it off. Amelia's getting her costume on. My mother's voice hardened, losing any trace of maternal concern and replacing it with pure, unadulterated annoyance. Did you hear that? Stop being so dramatic. We don't have time for this. Amelia has worked her entire life for this moment, and you will not ruin it with one of your episodes. We're leaving now. We'll check on you when we get home. Please, I whispered, the plea swallowed by a surge of nausea. Don't go. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence more painful than the screaming in my abdomen. They had chosen her recital over my surgery. They heard my terror, my agony, and they hung up. In that moment, something inside me didn't just break. It cauterized. The desperate, hopeful part of me that had spent 18 years craving a single scrap of their affection finally burned to ash. I would not die on this floor begging for people who didn't love me. I took a shuddering breath, the pain a constant roaring fire, and I dialed 911. It was the first time in my life I had ever asked a stranger for help. And as I lay there, listening to the calm voice of the dispatcher, I made a vow. It would be the last time I ever called my family for help again. As the paramedics strapped me to a gurney, their faces a blur of professional concern, my gaze fell on a framed photo on the hall table. It was the one family picture we had where I wasn't pushed to the side. I was a toddler on a woman's lap, a woman with kind eyes and a fierce smile. My grandmother, the woman my mother called a monster and had cut from our lives a decade ago. A faint, almost forgotten memory flickered. A small, carved wooden box she had given me, with a secret compartment. A box I hadn't opened in years. Lying in the sterile white hospital bed, the post-op fog was thick, but the clarity of my new reality was sharper than any scalpel. Acute appendicitis, the surgeon had said. It had ruptured. You're lucky you called when you did, young lady. A few more hours could have been catastrophic. Lucky. I tasted the word. It felt alien. My luck had always been the bad kind, the sort that got you born into a family that treated you like a piece of inconvenient furniture. My family, as promised, had not come. They didn't answer the hospital's calls. Hours after I woke from the anesthesia, a single text message illuminated my phone screen. It was from my father. Amelia was brilliant. Got a standing ovation. Hope you're feeling better. That was it. No questions, no apologies. Just a bulletin from the life I was never truly a part of. I didn't reply. I simply deleted the message and then his number. Then my mother's, then Amelia's. It was a digital amputation, and I felt nothing but relief. My entire life had been a masterclass in being invisible. Amelia, my younger sister by 2 years, was the sun around which our family orbited. She was the prodigy, the delicate artist, the one destined for greatness on the world's ballet stages. From the moment she took her first plie at age 3, my parents had become the willing financiers and emotional support staff for her grand ambition. Our home wasn't a home. It was the headquarters for Project Amelia. Her dance lessons, which cost more than our monthly mortgage, were an investment. Her custom made point shoes, her private tutors, her trips to summer intensives in Europe, all non negotiable expenses. My needs, in contrast, were frivolous luxuries. When I needed braces, my mother told me to just smile with your mouth closed. When I won the state science fair in 10th grade, earning a small scholarship to a summer STEM camp, my parents claimed they couldn't afford the travel and lodging. A week later, they bought Amelia a $5,000 professional grade tutu for a minor regional competition. The financial neglect was just a symptom of the deeper emotional void. My achievements were met with indifference, my struggles with irritation. I learned to be quiet, to be self-sufficient, to take up as little space as possible. I was the responsible one, the one who got perfect grades without being asked, the one who did her own laundry and made her own meals because my mother was too busy shuttling Amelia from one studio to the next. I thought that if I was perfect, if I caused them no trouble, they would eventually notice me. They would eventually love me as much as they loved her. It was a fool's hope. The favoritism was a poison that had seeped into every corner of our lives. Amelia grew up believing her every whim was law. She was beautiful, talented, and profoundly cruel. She knew the power she held, and she wielded it with surgical precision. She would borrow my things and return them broken, then cry to our mother that I was selfish for being upset. She would read my diary and mock my private thoughts at the dinner table, knowing our parents would just laugh and call it sisterly teasing. She was their golden child, and I was the shadow she cast. The deepest cut, the one that festered long before my appendix burst, came from my mother. Her name was Evelyn, and she was the architect of my isolation. She saw me not as a daughter, but as a rival for resources, a distraction from her life's true project. Amelia. Her words were tiny, sharp needles. Why can't you be more graceful like your sister? Don't be so needy, Clara. You're draining my energy. Your sister is the artist. You're practical. Practical was her code word for plain, for boring, for unworthy. Now, staring at the acoustic tile ceiling of the hospital room, I saw it all with horrifying clarity. It wasn't just neglect. It was systematic abuse, a slow, deliberate erasure of my worth. They hadn't just forgotten me in a moment of panic. They had made a conscious choice, weighing my life against a dance recital and finding it wanting. And that's when I remembered the box. The small wooden chest my maternal grandmother, Eleanor, had given me on my 5th birthday, just before my mother severed all ties. My mother had hated Eleanor. She claimed her own mother was a cold, calculating businesswoman who never supported her artistic dreams, which was ironic, given how she now treated me. The official story was that Eleanor had disapproved of my father and had tried to sabotage their marriage. But the letters I'd found hidden in the attic years ago told a different story. They were letters from Eleanor to me, sent every birthday and Christmas, all unanswered. They spoke of a trust fund she had established for me, of her desire to see me, of her sorrow over my mother's bitter silence. My mother had hidden them, lied about them, and stolen years of a relationship from me. When I was finally discharged from the hospital, a kindly nurse pushing me in a wheelchair to the curb, I didn't call for a ride home. I called a taxi and gave the driver the address of a storage unit I had rented with money saved from a part-time library job my parents knew nothing about. Inside, under a pile of old textbooks, was the wooden box. My hands trembled as I lifted the lid. There were the trinkets of a childhood I barely remembered: a polished stone, a tiny silver locket, a pressed flower. I felt for the false bottom, just as I had a dozen times before. It clicked open. Beneath it lay the bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon, and tucked into the last envelope was a business card. It was thick, expensive cardstock, embossed with a simple, elegant logo, Vance Sterling Holdings. And beneath it, a name, Eleanor Vance, CEO. Below that was a phone number. Not the old landline from the letters, but a direct private line. My family thought they had left me with nothing. They were wrong. They had left me with a weapon. My apathetic father, my cruel mother, my narcissistic sister. They had no idea what was coming. They thought they had finally silenced me, left me broken on the kitchen floor. But a fire had been lit in that sterile hospital room. My quest for their love was over. My quest for justice was just beginning. Back in my small, sterile apartment, rented with the last of my secret savings, I held the business card in my hand. For a full day, I just looked at it. It felt heavier than it should, like the weight of a life I could have had, a future I could still claim. The decision to call was the hardest I'd ever made. It meant finally, irrevocably, admitting that my own parents were my enemies. It meant declaring a war I wasn't sure I could win. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed the number. I expected a secretary, a series of transfers, a corporate wall. Instead, a woman's voice answered on the second ring, crisp and clear as a winter morning. Eleanor Vance. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat closed up. "Hello?" she said, a hint of impatience in her tone. "Grandma?" The word came out as a squeak, childish and uncertain. The line went silent. I could hear the faint, ambient sounds of an office, a soft hum, the distant click of a keyboard. I thought she might hang up, that this was a mistake, that my mother had been right and she was a cold, heartless woman who wanted nothing to do with me. "Clara?" she finally asked, and the ice in her voice had melted, replaced by something I couldn't identify. Shock? Disbelief? Hope? "It's me," I said, my voice shaking. I'm sorry to bother you. I found your card." "Bother me?" Her voice was stronger now, infused with a sudden fierce energy. "Child, I have waited 18 years for this call. Where are you? Are you all right?" And with that, the dam broke. The years of forced composure, of swallowing my tears and pretending I was fine, crumbled away. I told her everything. I started with the kitchen floor, the white-hot pain, the phone call to my mother. I told her about the recital, the text message, the years of being treated like a ghost in my own home. I told her about my college fund being drained for Amelia's tutus, about being denied basic medical care, about the constant, grinding emotional abuse. I talked until my voice was raw and my cheeks were slick with tears I hadn't even realized I was crying. She didn't interrupt. She just listened. The silence on her end of the line wasn't empty. It was heavy, gathering force like a thundercloud. When I was finished, my story hanging in the air between us, she said two words that changed the course of my life forever. "I'm coming." 3 hours later, a black town car purred to a stop outside my dingy apartment building. A woman stepped out, and though she was older than the photo I remembered, there was no mistaking her. Eleanor Vance was tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, her silver hair cut in a sharp, elegant bob. She had the same fierce eyes I remembered, but now I could see the intelligence and power that radiated from her like a physical force. She wasn't just a grandmother, she was an empress. She took one look at my pale face and the slight wince of pain as I moved, and her expression hardened. She didn't hug me, not at first. She simply placed a hand on my arm, her touch firm and steadying. "We'll go to my hotel," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You will tell me everything again, and this time you will leave out nothing, and you will show me the proof." In the plush suite at the Four Seasons, a place so luxurious it felt like another planet, I laid out my case. It wasn't just a story of a sad childhood anymore, it was an indictment. I had been meticulous. For years, I had secretly documented the injustices. I had copies of my parents' bank statements that I'd found while searching for my birth certificate, showing large withdrawals from my designated college savings account that corresponded directly with receipts for Amelia's dance expenses. I had my report cards, a string of straight A's and academic awards filed next to Amelia's, which were a sea of mediocre C's. I had the hidden letters. I even had a recording. Weeks before the appendix incident, I had a premonition, a sick feeling that things were escalating. I had downloaded an app to my phone that recorded all my calls. I played her the audio of me begging my mother for help, of my father's dismissal, of the final damning click as they hung up on their daughter who they believed was faking a medical emergency. Eleanor listened to the recording, her face impassive, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the arm of the chair. When it was over, she sat in silence for a long time, her gaze fixed on the city skyline. "Your mother was always a fool," she said at last, her voice dangerously quiet. "She mistook my financial prudence for a lack of love. I offered to pay for her education, a business degree, so she could build a life for herself. She wanted a blank check to fund a life of leisure and artistic dabbling. When I refused, she called me a monster and cut me off. It seems she has spent the last 2 decades projecting her own failings onto you." She turned to face me, her eyes boring into mine. "This is not just neglect, Clara. This is a deliberate, calculated campaign of abuse. They haven't just stolen your childhood. They've committed fraud. That college fund I set up for you was part of a generational trust. It had specific legal stipulations. To divert it to Amelia was illegal." A plan began to form in her eyes, a cold, brilliant, and terrifying strategy. This wasn't just about getting me away from them anymore. This was about retribution. "They value 2 things above all else," Eleanor said, a thin, ruthless smile touching her lips. "Money and public image. So we will take both. We will dismantle their lives so completely, so publicly, that they will have nothing left but their regret." She leaned forward. "Your victory will not be given to you, Clara. You will earn it. I will provide the resources, the weapons, but you will be the one to wield them. This is your war. I am simply your quartermaster. First, you need to heal. Then, you need to get angry. And then, we will burn their world to the ground." In that moment, sitting in that opulent hotel room with this formidable woman I barely knew, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Power. The decision was made. I would no longer be a victim. I would be the architect of their downfall. The plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclamation. My money, my future, my self-worth, I was going to take it all back. The first phase of our plan began with subtlety and precision. While I recovered my physical strength under Eleanor's watchful eye, she put her army of lawyers and financial investigators to work. They moved like ghosts through the paper trail of my parents' lives, and what they found was worse than I had ever imagined. The college fund was just the beginning. My father, a mid-level manager at a logistics company, had been living far beyond his means for years. The house was mortgaged to the hilt. They had multiple high-interest credit cards, all maxed out to pay for Amelia's ever-escalating expenses. They had even taken out a private loan against a life insurance policy my grandfather had left for me, forging my signature to do so. They weren't just bad parents, they were criminals. Eleanor laid out the documents on the polished mahogany table of her home office. "They are a house of cards," she said, her voice sharp with contempt. "All it will take is one firm push, and it will all come tumbling down." The push was planned with theatrical flair. My mother's greatest ambition was to climb the social ladder of our city's old money elite. Her chosen vehicle was the annual fundraising gala for the city's prestigious ballet company, a glittering affair where wealthy patrons preened and pledged enormous sums. For my mother, getting a seat on the gala's organizing committee had been the pinnacle of her social climbing career. This year, Amelia was scheduled to perform a solo piece, an honor meant to showcase her as the company's brilliant new prodigy and solidify my mother's status as the matriarch of a great artistic talent. The gala was their stage. It was perfect. It would be ours instead. While her lawyers prepared the legal assault, Eleanor and I worked on me. She enrolled me in etiquette classes, public speaking workshops, and sessions with a top stylist. It wasn't about changing who I was, she explained, but about forging an exterior that matched the strength I was discovering within myself. The mousy, invisible girl who hid in oversized sweaters was replaced by a poised young woman with a will of iron. I learned to walk into a room and command attention, to speak with quiet authority, to meet a person's gaze without flinching. I was being remade, not in Amelia's image, but in Eleanor's. Meanwhile, we set the financial traps. Eleanor, through one of her holding companies, quietly bought up my parents' debt. The maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage, the fraudulent loan, she owned it all. She became their silent, unseen creditor. They continued their lavish spending, completely unaware that the safety net they thought they had was now a cage, and that Eleanor held the key. The week before the gala, the first blow fell. The bank, now acting on Eleanor's instructions, called in the second mortgage, citing a clause in the fine print. Suddenly, my parents were faced with an astronomical balloon payment they had no way of making. Panic set in. I could only imagine the frantic, whispered conversations, the blame being thrown back and forth in the house that was no longer truly theirs. Then came the credit card companies, demanding immediate payment in full. My father's salary was frozen due to a preliminary legal filing by Eleanor's team regarding the fraudulent loan, a move that left him powerless. Their income stream dried up overnight. They were trapped, bleeding money, with their biggest social event of the year just days away. They were desperate. And that's exactly where we wanted them. My mother did what she always did when faced with a problem. She tried to use her children. But this time, her usual target was gone. I hadn't spoken to them since the day I left the hospital. My number was changed, my whereabouts unknown. They left frantic, then angry, then pleading voicemails on my old phone, which I had given to Eleanor's head of security. So they turned to Amelia. They pressured her to appeal to the ballet company's wealthy patrons, to leverage her artistic genius to secure a sponsorship, a thinly veiled request for a bailout. This was the moment we had been waiting for. The night of the gala was a spectacle of diamonds and champagne. The city's elite had gathered in the grand ballroom of the historic Atherton Hotel. My parents stood near the entrance, their faces masks of strained cordiality. They looked haggard, the stress showing in the lines around their eyes, but they were dressed in their finest, determined to maintain the illusion of their perfect life. Amelia was backstage, preparing for the performance that was supposed to be her crowning achievement. Eleanor and I made our entrance. We weren't announced, but a hush fell over the room as we walked in. Eleanor Vance was a legend in the business world, a titan who rarely made public appearances. To see her here was a shock. To see her with a beautifully dressed, composed young woman who was the spitting image of a younger Eleanor was a mystery. Whispers followed us like a ripple in a pond. I could feel my parents' eyes on me. I saw the flash of recognition, then utter disbelief, then a dawning horror on my mother's face. She started towards us, but Eleanor simply raised a single dismissive eyebrow, and my mother froze in her tracks. We took our seats at the head table, a table Eleanor had donated a king's ransom to secure. The chairman of the ballet company, a man named Mr. Dubois, fawned over her, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding. The performances began. Dancer after dancer crossed the stage, but the room was buzzing with speculation about our presence. Finally, it was Amelia's turn. Mr. Dubois took the stage to introduce her. "And now," he boomed, his voice full of manufactured gravitas, "we have a very special performance. A young woman of prodigious talent and boundless potential, the future of our company. Please welcome Amelia Dubois." He had misspoken. He had used his own last name. An aide rushed to the stage and whispered in his ear. Mr. Dubois looked flustered. "My apologies, a slip of the tongue. Please welcome Amelia. Amelia Croft." But the damage was done. The Freudian slip was a public humiliation, a clear sign that my father's name, my family's name, meant nothing in this world they so desperately wanted to join. I saw my father shrink in his chair. Amelia's performance was technically flawless. She executed every leap, every pirouette with precision. But something was missing. The spark, the passion, it wasn't there. Her face was a mask of intense concentration, her eyes scanning the audience, searching for the wealthy patrons she'd been coached to impress. She wasn't an artist. She was a product for sale, and the pressure had hollowed her out. When she finished, there was polite but not rapturous applause. Her moment of triumph had fizzled. After the performance, Mr. Dubois returned to the stage for the main fundraising appeal. He spoke of nurturing talent, of the costs of excellence, of the community's duty to support its artists. He then motioned to my parents. And no one knows this better than Richard and Evelyn Croft, the proud parents of our dear Amelia. They have made incredible sacrifices to support their daughter's dream. This was our cue. Before my mother could stand and bask in the false praise, Eleanor rose from her seat. A microphone was instantly in her hand, provided by an aide who had been waiting for her signal. Mr. Dubois, ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor's voice rang through the silent ballroom, calm, clear, and cutting. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I feel a clarification is in order. You see, Evelyn is my daughter, and the young woman beside me, Clara, is my granddaughter. A collective gasp went through the room. My mother's face went white as a sheet. You speak of sacrifice, Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping across the stunned faces before landing on my parents. Let's talk about sacrifice. Let's talk about the trust fund I established for my granddaughter, Clara's education. A fund that was illegally drained year after year to pay for custom costumes and private coaching. A sacrifice Clara was forced to make without her knowledge or consent. She clicked a button on a small remote. The large screens on either side of the stage, which had been showing images of graceful dancers, suddenly flickered to life. Displayed for all to see were bank statements with highlighted withdrawals from the Clara Croft Educational Trust and corresponding deposits into accounts for ballet schools, coaches, and dressmakers. Let's talk about dedication, Eleanor's voice dropped, becoming laced with ice. While one daughter was being flown to Paris for summer intensives, the other was winning academic scholarships she was never allowed to accept. While one daughter was being lauded as a prodigy, the other was graduating as valedictorian of her high school with no one from her family in attendance. The screens changed again, showing my academic awards next to Amelia's lackluster report cards. The contrast was stark and brutal. But sacrifice isn't just about money, is it? It's about being there. It's about answering the phone when your child calls you, terrified, believing her appendix has just burst. She played the recording. My thin, pain-filled voice echoed through the grand ballroom. Mom, please, I think I need to go to the hospital. Then, my mother's cold dismissal. Stop being so dramatic. You will not ruin this for your sister. And finally, the damning click. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved, no one breathed. The entire gilded world my parents had built for themselves had been publicly, surgically, and irrevocably demolished. My mother stared at me, her face a mask of pure hatred and disbelief. My father seemed to have collapsed in on himself, a hollowed-out man. Amelia, who had come out from backstage to watch, looked utterly broken. The foundation of her entire life revealed to be a lie built on theft and neglect. Eleanor let the silence hang for a moment longer before delivering the final, killing blow. The Croft family is bankrupt, she announced, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge's gavel. The house they live in is in foreclosure. Their assets are frozen. They have sacrificed nothing. They have stolen everything. They are not patrons of the arts. They are frauds. And my granddaughter and I will be seeing them in court. She placed the microphone down on the table with a soft thud that echoed like a gunshot. She looked at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I stood up, and together we turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving the smoldering wreckage of their lives behind us. We didn't look back. The aftermath was swift and total. The gala became the biggest scandal in the city's high society circles. My parents were social pariahs overnight. The story was picked up by the local news, framing it as a shocking tale of familial betrayal and financial fraud. The public shaming was absolute, a fitting punishment for a family that valued appearances above all else. Legally, they were crushed. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud, embezzlement from a trust, and forgery, they had no defense. Eleanor's lawyers were merciless. To avoid a lengthy prison sentence, my father signed over everything. The house was sold at auction. Their cars were repossessed. The accounts were emptied to repay the trust, with punitive interest. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mountain of legal fees. They were forced to move into a cramped, rundown apartment on the other side of the state, the final, humiliating blow to their carefully constructed facade of upper-middle-class success. Amelia's career imploded. The ballet company, horrified by the scandal and no longer receiving a fire hose of cash from my parents, quietly dropped her from their main roster. Without the constant funding for private coaches and bespoke programs, she found she couldn't compete on raw talent alone. She had been a hothouse flower, and exposed to the real world, she wilted. The last I heard, she was teaching basic ballet to toddlers at a suburban strip mall studio. Her grand dreams of the world stage reduced to a life of quiet mediocrity. She had gotten the spotlight she always craved, just not in the way she had ever wanted. As for me, my life began. With Eleanor as my mentor and champion, the world opened up in ways I had never dared to imagine. The restored trust fund, now larger than ever, meant I could attend any university I wanted. I chose a top-tier business school, double majoring in finance and art history, a nod to both Eleanor's world and the passions my mother had tried to extinguish in me. Living with Eleanor was like being truly seen for the first time. She didn't praise me for being quiet or practical. She celebrated my intelligence, my resilience, my sharp analytical mind. We traveled, we went to museums, we debated business strategy over dinner. She taught me about investments, about philanthropy, about how to wield power with integrity and purpose. She wasn't just my grandmother. She was my family, my teacher, and my greatest ally. She had given me back the future my parents had tried to steal. One evening, about a year after the gala, Eleanor and I were sitting on the terrace of her penthouse, looking out over the glittering city lights. A letter had arrived earlier that day, forwarded by her lawyers. It was from my mother. I hadn't opened it. "Are you going to read it?" Eleanor asked gently, her eyes kind. I looked at the envelope, at the familiar spiky handwriting. For a moment, a phantom limb of my old life ached. A flicker of the little girl who just wanted her mom. But it was only a flicker. I had been that girl for 18 years. I had begged for love, for attention, for basic human decency, and had received nothing. The woman who wrote this letter was a stranger to me now, a ghost from a life that was no longer mine. "No," I said, my voice clear and steady. "There's nothing in there I need to hear. Apologies are pointless when the trust is gone. Regret doesn't change what they did." I took the letter and, without ceremony, tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces flutter from my hand and disappear into the night wind. It was a final act of release. I was not defined by their abuse or their neglect anymore. I was not Clara Croft, the forgotten daughter. I was Clara Vance, a woman forged in fire, saved by a fierce love I never knew existed, and the sole author of my own triumphant story. The future was mine, bright and boundless, and I would never again waste a single moment looking back at the ashes of a family who had never deserved me in the first place.